What if we thought about all the challenges we face in aged care, kind of like a train network? Let me explain. So like in a train network, there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of stops along the way, and everyone's a passenger on their own special journey. But if you don't know where you're going, and say you get on the wrong train, you can get lost in the system. And I mean, sure, there's plenty of good information around about how to catch a train. There's timetables, there's helpful staff and guards. But if you can't find someone or you don't know how to read a timetable, you're a bit stuck. You can fall through the cracks. And what's that saying about board a moving train? I feel like that kind of applies to aged care too. We need to meet elderly populations where they are and make sure they don't get left behind. And in aged care, technology plays a big part in that. Well, with me today, I'm joined by Jim Moraitis, CEO and founder of VillageLocal, who've made it their mission to guide older Australians through the labyrinth world of the aged care system. In this episode, we talk about the barriers that consumers and their supporting network face when trying to access home care services, the importance of systems thinking, integrations and robust feedback loops in aged care navigation, and the role that artificial intelligence and other technologies play in the aged care system. Collaboration starts with a conversation, Team HealthTech. Let's make it happen.
This is Talking HealthTech with me, Peter Birch, featuring content and community about technology in healthcare.
All right, cool. How you going?
Good, mate. How are you?
Good. Thanks for bringing me down out and about. I feel like this is on brand for you.
This is certainly my happy place, mate.
Yeah.
I was telling you before this kicked off that, get off, roll out of bed. Once I've got the kids out to school, it's a little bit of me time walking on a big 1 hour trip from my home around Marrickville and into the office. So I try to optimise it so I spend more time along the river. Something about looking at water.
The serenity, as they say.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some good alignment there too, because you're doing work in the community. Tell us a bit more about you, what you do, what keeps you busy.
What I do, right. So in terms of work, it's a little project called VillageLocal. So that's helping older people and their family members navigate their way through the complexities of the aged care system. I'm sure we can spend a little bit more time on that. But in terms of, what led me to that, I don't know. I've just always had an interest in looking at problems and the systems that those problems kind of live in. And trying to break it down. Take a look at, from a first principles standpoint, what's leading to that problem, and are we really looking at it at the right layer to actually solve for good outcomes? So, everything from fixing a vintage car, which I've always been into, to scaling that up to my, the healthcare industry background in biomedical engineering. So, I've always been around healthcare. But I just like taking that approach to problem solving.
Got it. And it's interesting because, when we talk about aged care on the Talking HealthTech podcast, it comes up pretty regularly because I guess, an older demographic is one that would typically require the use of more healthcare services, but there's a lot more to the problems to be solved in aged care than just health, I imagine.
It's a really fascinating and complex situation. When it comes to aged care, there's a whole perception thing. What is aged care? And if you speak to the consumer, the older person themselves, or a family member that is part of the care network for that older person, the concept of aged care can mean totally different things. And then you add another layer into it, and that is, service providers and healthcare professionals. They would look at it as a different thing as well. Just take a pause. The Marrickville pause.
The Marrickville pause. We'll probably keep it in.
It's a thing, actually. It's the Marrickville pause.
People are used to it in the area. That's right, we can use AI to get rid of it. That's fine.
But just on that topic, right, so a lot of the older people we speak to, you can clearly see they're living with multiple chronic conditions, progressive disease, high risk for hospital readmission, and then use the terminology of what the sector uses of have you spoken to My Aged Care, or are you getting aged care services? And a common response that we receive is, I'm not an invalid. The word invalid seems to be used a lot in this demographic, and it's almost like a perception and a branding thing for the consumer that says, if I accept care, I'm communicating to the world that I'm no longer able to look after myself.
Interesting.
Right? It really is fascinating. But then when you look to a family member, they're saying, well, no mum, no dad, you're not needing care. It's just that we can't be here all the time to run errands and give you a lift to the shops or give you a lift to the doctor. So I just need a helper.
Yeah.
And then your healthcare professional would be really around, well, we want to help you maintain your independence. We want to help you, enable you to stay well and be, live the life that you want. So it's very, it means so much, that concept.
We can dive into that a bit more in a second in terms of VillageLocal, but I want to know, you mentioned you're big on solving problems and you've been so focused in the aged care space, but why aged care? This doesn't seem... It's difficult, I think, to attract people into the space generally. People come in because that's their job, but this is a strong passion for you.
It is a very strong passion for me. I've thought about this question a lot, actually, and typically, like a few years into the game now, I often think about, how the hell did I end up here? And I speak to other industry professionals and leaders in the aged care space, and I ask them, how did you end up in this space? And very rarely, actually, I can't think of anybody who has told me, Jim, I came out of school and I knew that aged care was going to be my thing, and I went there and I did the studies and because I knew that was my trajectory. I haven't come across anybody that said that. Typically, it's been the result of some reactive response or a situation that's landed somebody in that, and that's certainly what was the case for me. Before we started VillageLocal in 2017, I had no idea about the aged care system. I knew nothing about it. I'd been in healthcare for 15 years at that time, but mainly it was really around cardiac technology, radiology technology. I knew nothing about how the aged care system worked. And then there was this serendipitous moment where I pulled up from work one day, and my 87-year-old neighbour lived directly across the road from me, flagged me over, and she said, "Oh, Jim, can you help me, replace the garden hose?" And I said, "Yeah, no worries, Lillian." And I sort of ducked over. Her knuckles kind of like riddled with arthritis, and she handed me one of those, those vacuum sealed packets. You can't bloody open them. They're so hard to open. And it's that harder type of plastic as well, so you can't tell. You know the one, right?
Yeah.
So I could see that she'd hacked away at it a little bit, and she just gave up on it. So I, ripped it open, tore it open, and replaced the garden hose, had my 2 minutes of pleasantries with Lillian, and ducked inside. And then about a week or 2 weeks later, something like that, my wife, who's a social worker at the time at the Children's Hospital, Westmead, she pulls up, and it was raining on the day, and out of the corner of her eye, she saw Lillian laid down between her front door and her front gate. It's still on her property. It's, imagine like a inner city kind of little terrace, workers' cottage terrace. Laid down, obviously rushed over to her aid. And Lillian had slipped over. She was on a tiled footpath between her front door and front gate. She'd slipped over in the rain coming down the 2 or 3 stairs that she's got. And she'd been there for hours, calling out for help in the middle of a weekday, and nobody was around. And that situation there was the catalyst for Lillian ending up into RPA hospital, going from RPA hospital, doing a little bit of rehab, and then going from rehab into a nursing home.
Yeah.
And that's a real shame, right? Because, if I as if that's not bad enough, but in actual fact, 11 months prior, Lillian was doing a little bit of shopping on the high street of Marrickville, and she'd broken her other hip. A simple accident, could happen to anybody, but she had a little fall and she broke her other hip. Now, Lillian's sharp as a tack, this lady, and she'd been living in the community for 40 years, in that same house for 40 years. A very prominent member of the community, president of the bowls club, really plugged in. But typically the way these things go, you become quite socially isolated and whatnot. So 2 hospital admissions, 2 admissions to RPA hospital, 2 discharges to rehab. Lillian had been getting community services for a number of years prior to her first broken hip. So all these touch points with the healthcare system, the aged care system. Yet none of those situations led to Lillian being able to stay in her own home, independent and well and plugged in. So once I'd personally kind of got over the guilt that I felt, I was only a week and a half that I saw Lily. I saw how frail she was. Right? Yeah. And I thought to myself, far out, I've dedicated my life, my career to the healthcare industry, and this happened right under my nose. I thought, oh look, I'm gonna look into this. Yeah. And the first sort of thing I did was I just kind of reached out to our local council. And I said, what are we doing? This is the Inner West Council. I said, what are we doing to help older people in our local community maintain their independence? Yeah. And I was blown away by the response that I received. It was not what I expected. I was expecting to hear things like, oh, Jim, there's no money, there's no resources, this, that, and the other. And instead what I found was, a plethora of resources, a plethora of community investment in social activities, community support, all like the investment was there. But they said to me, Jim, the biggest challenge that we have as a local council is to access those who are most vulnerable, those who desperately need the services. They're the hardest to access because they're the most isolated. Typically, they're the hardest to engage online. It's hard to do anything at scale when you're dealing with that cohort. And that's when I just found that a really fascinating thing. And so, I thought, oh, I'm gonna have a closer look at that.
And is that what VillageLocal is? Then you've got that online space for the community for.
Our mission at VillageLocal is to keep older people independent, safe, and well in their communities. Full stop. That's it. So what that encompasses so much, right? In some facets, we are partnering with local healthcare organisations, home care providers, community groups to enable them to better connect with the community, to access those who are extremely vulnerable but desperately need to interact or interface with these organisations. And on the other side of the coin, we are directly connecting with those seniors and family members and providing a lot of education and advocacy because the aged care system is extremely complex. There's professionals that work in the industry that find it complex. So, when it's a consumer that enters it for the first time, right, it can be mind-boggling. And it's often referred to as a maze or, of that effect. So yeah, we're helping a lot of seniors navigate the aged care system, understand their consumer rights, understand what their entitlements are, and also understand or trying to give the skill set to think critically. Because as I mentioned a little while ago, the sector is complex and there's a lot of grey zones in it. So when you come across an industry professional who's trying to interpret it as best they can, their interpretation might not be the right interpretation to meet the consumer's needs. So it's important for the consumer to think critically about the information that they're getting. And further to that point, a lot of people receiving aged care services, they're receiving those services because they've relied on the advice, the guidance of an industry professional. A lot of it hasn't been them sort of like, oh, this is my situation, I can articulate it, I can understand it, and now here are my options, I've done my research, and I'm choosing this.
Yes.
In a very, well thought out. It hasn't been that. Yeah. It's typically, I recognise you, Mrs. Smith, 85-year-old Mrs. Smith, you've got these challenges, and in my professional opinion, this is what you need to do. And the consumer's like, okay, you're the authority figure, I'll listen to you.
Interesting. I mean, it sounds like one of those problems to solve that everyone kind of points at someone else and say, it doesn't, the council sort this out, and the council say, oh, this is like local kind of groups and social groups, and the social groups say, we haven't got money to do this. So finding those that you can partner with or that can advocate and try and fly that flag, I imagine would be pretty important.
The reality is keeping somebody independent, safe and well in their home for as long as possible, right? It's not just about sending support workers into a home to cook and clean.
Yes.
There is an emotional aspect of it. There is a social aspect of it. There is a political aspect of it. There's a financial aspect of it. There is so many facets where you need deep expertise in that. So it's unfathomable to think that the one entity, one organisation can deliver an end-to-end experience to enable that person to live their best life. Like anybody who thinks, any organisation who thinks that they can do it all, I don't even know how any organisation could think that, because it is so complex. So the real challenge that we've got our teeth sunk into is, well, how do these expert domains integrate with one another and support the consumer along their journey, their aged care journey, which never ends. Well, it ends eventually. One day it will end for all of us. But the ageing experience, the aged care journey, how do all these organisations, entities, individuals support that aged care journey? And then how does the consumer, in a seat of empowerment or a position of empowerment, to orchestrate it, to coordinate it, to participate in it, in that journey? So VillageLocal's kind of trying to act as the glue in that sandwich, to try to curate a bit co-pilot, if you like, with the consumer through that journey.
What does that actually look like for the consumer or for the stakeholders that you work with?
We've kind of niched down, or hyper niched down really, to a subsegment of older people who are doing it tough, suffering in silence. And if I was going to be really specific in our sub-niche, it's literally 82 to 85-year-old older people. Majority of that demographic just happens to be women, right? Who are living alone in their home, who have multiple chronic disease, progressive conditions, who have a high hospital readmission risk. Right? So we're looking at those people, and it's typically people who haven't yet interacted with aged care services. Okay? So if you think about what that person looks like, multiple chronic conditions, like, you can be at any age and be living with multiple chronic conditions, and life isn't as easy as it could be, right? Let alone if you're 83-year-old Lillian or 87-year-old Lillian. So we're looking at those people, then we're kind of thinking about, all right, well, what does their typical day look like? What are their challenges? Are they actively seeking out home support services? Chances are they're not. So if we wanted to engage them and start a conversation with them to help them think about how to make life a little bit better, what's the topic of conversation that we should be engaging with? It certainly is, do you need home care? It's certainly not that, right? What we've typically done is we've produced a lot of educational material, lifestyle material that we publish through a number of different channels, both online and offline media, that talk about just the day-to-day challenges of life that you can have at any age, but are hyper prevalent for that hyper niche demographic that we're looking at. And that just seems to really resonate with people. Then we gather those people and put them in a community environment where they can share their stories with other people, like-minded people. That builds a lot of social connection. That we're really doing that to tackle that social isolation aspect of it. But we're also to prompt further education and prompt a desire to educate. So people are in that social environment, and then that casual nature of information flowing, we combine that with a very structured educational process as well. So we've got a thing called the Care Path program, where it's a structured process of taking somebody through the aged care journey, profiling where they're up to at that state, in this stage of the journey, and then providing them with relevant information that solves very predictable problems that most people would have when they're at that stage of the aged care journey. So that's kind of like the experience that consumers would have. And it's a very organic sort of thing. So people who are going through the Care Path program, majority of people don't realise that they're going through an official Care Path program. They're just having a relationship with VillageLocal.
With you mentioned the online community. I've jumped in there too, and it's easy to access and stuff. I was surprised, I got to say, that there's some really good engagement, and you talk about the elderly demographic engaging in an online community. People say, oh, if they've got phones, but like there's a lot of activity that's going on there.
It's interesting when that situation happened with my neighbour Lillian. I mentioned one of the first things I did was reach out to the council, but the very first thing that I did was I was having a chat with my mum. It might have been that night that it happened. And we're just chatting, and my mum was born in a little village in Sicily, in Italy. And I said, Ma, how do the oldies stay safe in the villages? This is not just in Sicily, but throughout Europe, right? And my mum said to me, she goes, Jim, in the villages, there's always a local keeping an eye out for the oldie. And I just said, it just sort of came out. I said, if only I was a better village local for Lillian.
Yeah.
And that's how we got our name, Village Local. Right? So that's really what we're kind of empowering people to do. It's like, be aware of your surroundings, those in your community. Be aware of the challenges that people are facing, but also be aware of potential pathways or solutions. You might not have all the answers, but just be aware. And then make connections.
Yeah.
Right? One connection can lead somebody down a pathway that ultimately leads them to a domain expert in that area who can go deep and solve a problem.
Yeah.
But just be aware.
Yeah.
And the online community group, I often get asked, well, Jim, seniors aren't tech savvy.
Yeah,
So, how can you expect people to be in a social media environment, typing away, sharing concepts and stuff like that? And to that, I think about it two ways. I sort of think, the first thing I think of is, well, I detest that term, tech savvy. What is tech savvy, right? It's so binary, right? It's either tech savvy or you're not, right?
Yeah.
The reality is your level of tech enablement is a scale from not being able to turn your phone on or not having a phone to programming, right? You would fit somewhere in the middle. Right? Being able to use a dial-up telephone on the wall is a rung on that ladder as well. And I think of my grandfather in that regard. My grandfather came to Australia, migrated to Australia. In Italian, couldn't read or write, can't read or write in Italian, or maybe to a very, very basic level. In English, certainly can't read or write. Not tech savvy, very low on the tech enablement scale. Didn't have a computer, didn't have internet or anything like that. And then a few years ago, my cousin gave my grandfather a hand-me-down iPhone, right? So there, if you went to my grandfather's place, you'd probably see him with his iPhone out. Typical hierarchical family environment, right, where the Italian head of state is at the end of the table, and he's observing his environment, his community. And my grandfather would probably be at the end of that table with his phone out, doing these ones.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Occasional.
And everybody knows what he's doing. Like, he's on Facebook.
Yeah.
Right? So what my cousin did was gave him a hand-me-down iPhone, set up a profile on Facebook, and he can scroll it, and he's just looking at photos of his friends, family in the motherland, right? So he's just like gone, made a really, really big step in his tech enablement journey. Now, if somebody's willing to do that, he can't open an email, he can't send an email.
Yeah.
But now he's got the ability to become aware of stuff. Now, he can't read or write, but he can look at images.
Yeah.
And just looking at images, that's a form of communication that you can get a message through to somebody. So when you take that back to our online forum, there's going to be heaps of people that are part of our village local community that the only way that we interact with them is over a telephone, one-on-one. But what we expect from the thousands of people in the Village Local hub, the Village Local community group, is that they are the eyes and ears on the front line. They run the last mile to Lillian, who's not online. That's what we're hoping for the Village Local and the online Village Local community group.
So good. Keeping on that theme of technology, we're in an age where one would argue that it's moving very fast, and artificial intelligence has been around for a long time, but definitely all the rage now, and potentially it's touching a lot of stuff that we do. Do you see a role that some of these emerging technologies might play in assisting solve for these problems that we've been talking
Absolutely. I produce a lot of content myself, a lot of videos, a lot of educational videos, and I'm putting them out into the community, and people are always sending me emails, calling my team and I up, posting stuff on the Village Local Community Hub, and people are always asking the same questions, right? People are always asking the same questions, and you may have covered that topic just the week before.
Yeah.
And then a new person's entering the community group and asking the same question. It really is about, number one, making the information, or making people aware that the information exists. Okay. And then number two, making it really easy to access. I think in the space that I'm playing in the hyper niche that VillageLocal's playing in, that's really where we're starting to play with AI. You know, it's take a look at what people's behaviours are, what questions being asked, what the conversation's looking like, and then being able to proactively serve up the right content at the right time. And then, you know, an element of gamification as well, where it can really motivate people to take action, to further explore options, to overcome mental bias about what aged care looks like. So yeah, we're playing with AI in that sort of regard. In its simplest form, putting a survey in front of somebody who's expressed a need for some support, and then coming up with bespoke, customised platter of content that say, hey, digest this stuff. It's probably relevant to your situation.
Sure.
So that's how we're using it at the moment, and it's working really well.
Got you. And I imagine in the aged care system generally, or those that are in the system, there's, you know, a lot of talk around the, especially if you're looking at keeping people in home, you know, the automated stuff and the Google assistants and the homes and things like that. So I imagine that space will be, you know, if done well and on balance, can be a good enabler, and if it can achieve that objective of keeping people safe and happy and well connected in their home for a little bit longer, then that's probably a good thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, just on that topic, right, probably about maybe 7 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, we saw this huge wave of smart tech.
Yep.
You know, home smart tech, sensors and all that sort of stuff. It's probably going more like 10 years now, actually. And there was a lot of investment globally, on a global scale, into this aging tech.
Yeah.
You know, and then it's kind of really padded out. Like you don't hear much of it anymore. There's a little bit going on here and there, but it's certainly died out. And I think people just came to the realisation, innovators came to the realisation that we kind of need to walk before we run.
Yeah.
You know, there is so much happening, there's so much friction and crappy consumer experience on a very, very basic level that for organisations that are wanting to invest in innovation, they're saying that's really where you're going to get the biggest return on your investment. It's just solve the basics, you know, pick the lowest lying fruit. You can go for a walk. Anybody, I challenge anybody listening to this, you know, in the future, walk down the street in your local area for 20 minutes. Just walk down the street, but keep your head up. Don't walk with your head to the ground. Look up, and I guarantee you will see somebody, walk past somebody who is in their 70s or 80s, and you can physically see that they are doing it tough. They may not be willing to admit it themselves, but you can physically see that they are doing it tough, and they're probably putting themselves in harm's way as well, either themselves in harm's way or somebody else. They're causing stress for somebody else and supporting them so that they don't hurt themselves. Ask yourself the question, like, what could the aged care sector be doing right now to support that very person? Probably approaching them with smart technology in the home, or doing if it's an organisation that delivers home care services, giving them a brochure to say, hey, this is how the aged care system works, and this is the type of home care support services we can provide you with. That probably isn't the answer as well.
Yeah.
What does that person need? What would delight that person? What will create a moment that matters for that person in that moment? Anybody can do it.
Yeah. And I feel like that answer would probably be something that's personalised and meaningful to that specific individual.
Absolutely.
And those things are built over
Absolutely.
the trust and everything over time. So.
I'd love to be able to, like, we've a bit over 20,000 people now across Australia going through our Care Path program. Right. I would love to think, oh man, we can just process the hell out of this thing, right? Scale it up, you know, put it all in a neat package. But the reality is you can't, right? There's obviously certain levels of automation and systemization that we deploy to be able to deliver the Care Path experience for that many people across the country. But a lot of it is you know, roll the sleeves up, get on a phone call, right? And just yesterday I was on a call with my aged care, doing a 3-way conversation with an elderly person. Actually, they weren't even that old. They were in their early 70s, who'd been bumping around what is currently called the Commonwealth Home Support Program system and kind of banging their head against the wall, not being able to access the service they need. So you kind of hear that and you're like, let's just get on the phone with my aged care. And that's an hour and a half exercise, right? Which is why a lot of health professionals don't have the time to do that. Sometimes it's all you can do.
And thinking then, what do you need? Because it's a great thing to be solving for and a challenge that no doubt will keep your brain ticking over and keeping you busy. But, these things, it's got to be funded somehow, and it's got to be an ongoing sustainable thing, and hopefully live on beyond, yourself and instill a lot of these kind of things into everyone that's going through the care pathway thing and anything in between. But what do you need to make some of that kind of thing happen?
Yeah, let me answer that question this way. So when Lillian's situation happened, one of the first things that I did was I thought, well, I hypothesised, what would the solution be? What would Lillian have needed to prevent that adverse outcome?
Yeah.
And I just thought, my first hypothesis was, if Lillian was just aware that these things were available, then she could have gotten plugged into them, she could have got the next level up of support. Happy days. So what I did was I just kind of profiled all the things that the local Inner West Council were offering, and I just started socialising them to seniors in my local community. And I said, if you need any help plugging into this, then here's my phone number, just give me a call. It was not a business. It was not a, VillageLocal. Right?
Yeah.
It was just a thing that I was doing in the community, that's all. I found it really surprising that I had a lot of people calling me. Right? I only handed out a few of these summaries, and I had a lot of people calling me, a lot of seniors calling me, and a lot of curiosity. How do I get plugged in? This, that, and the other. So there was a lot of interest. But then when I checked up with them a few months later, checking in, like, how you going? Nobody had taken any action. Right? Nobody had taken any action. So that kind of readjusted my hypothesis. You start thinking, well, what are the barriers that prevent people taking action? And then I thought, all right, well, because people desperately need help, I was willing to invest in somebody to give me a hand, because I was busy with my career and stuff like that. So I just got somebody to give me a hand, just to following up with this stuff. And it was providing a really good community service. So much so that we're getting a lot of interest in what I now know is aged care navigation. Right. So then I thought, well, this is not sustainable. I've got a career. At the time, I was busy in my career. I had a 1-year-old child. I was finishing off my MBA. I was flying in and out of the country. Life was pretty chaotic, right? So what I did was I just kind of thought, right, which organisations are out there that would benefit from this type of service existing in the local community? And knowing hardly anything about the aged care system at the time, I stumbled across this concept of an aged care provider. So I just reached out to one and I said, hey, would you be willing to sponsor this person that I've got following up with seniors? And what's in it for you is, if you do that, then if we come across somebody that needs your organisation or your services, well, obviously we're going to let them know about you, and they can give you a call and you guys can do your thing. I was really blown away that how willing organisations were to support that initiative. And then I quickly realised, well, a lot of these organisations were investing a lot of money in what they call marketing. Right? But really what it was they're just trying to engage the local community, educate the community. They're investing internally in people to educate the community. Having conversations with these organisations, I asked them, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing in helping people navigate? And the answer was quite consistent. They said to me, we always get seniors, family members calling us up requiring support. They may not have the funding level required, or they may not have any funding, and we always give them the information. We tell them, go and follow this information, and then when you get the funding or you get approved, then come back to us and we can start delivering services. Now, from my very brief experience at the time, I realised, well, that's a really complex thing, and there's really low compliance to taking action. And then I realised, well, that needs to be a very robust process with a lot of safety barriers and nets to prevent people from falling through the cracks. And that's when we thought, all right, let's structure an actual process to help people navigate the aged care system, but also have organisations being able to leverage that infrastructure, that work that we've created. And that's one of the main reasons why we essentially productised that care path program. It's pretty much so organisations who see the value of it existing in their community, they can support it, they can support the existence. So that's really what our whole business model is. It's, all right, this Care Path program, it's in your local community. If you find that if you provide a valuable service to your community that local older people and family members would benefit from knowing about your organisation, support the program. If you haven't got the money to support the program, take a look at your marketing budget. Because if you're spending money on marketing to attract clients, patients, customers, whatever it is, have a think about, like, is there a way that we can tick that box? Like, every business needs to tick that box, but also have a really impactful, or really have a really positive social impact at the same time. And this is an option for organisations to explore. So,
nice one. And if there are organisations that are listening or watching and want to chat more about doing some things, or just generally anyone that wants to learn more about VillageLocal, what should they do?
Yeah, well, look, we work with so many organisations who don't sponsor the Care Path program, but they're organisations that we've come to know and trust and really respect, and provide such a valuable service and offering to the community that we're going to let the village locals, the thousands of them across the country, know about your organisation anyway, because that's what we're about. But if you wanted to support the Care Path program, or figure out how you can get involved with it, visit us online. Go to the VillageLocal website, villagelocal.com.au, or you can go to we've got a dedicated Care Path website as well, carepath.com.au, so check it out, learn a little bit more. If you're a healthcare professional or an industry professional that's got something to add from an educational standpoint and want to just get involved in helping seniors, older people navigate the aged care system, go and join the VillageLocal Community Hub. Both those websites will funnel you into there and contribute.
Love it. Really appreciate making the time and bringing me down to have a chat here out in the wild. And we're looking forward to sharing all the great work you're doing with the Talking HealthTech community and our audience. So thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
For more content and community about technology and healthcare, visit talkinghealthtech.com.